Psalm 61. Psalm 61. Somewhat like Psalm 46, like so many other Psalms are, a cry for help when in trouble. This is a Psalm of David. Another Psalm where we're not given the exact occasion, but obviously he tells us that he is struggling. And what's particularly helpful about the Psalm, I think, is he begins in verses 1 and 2 with a cry for help, and he ends in verse 8 with praising God. And we want to look at that and how he gets from one place to the other. Psalm 61. Hear my cry, O God. Give heed to my prayer. From the end of the earth, I will call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been a refuge for me, a tower of strength against the enemy. Let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. Selah. For you have heard my vows, O God. You have given me the inheritance of those who fear your name. You will prolong the king's life. His years will be as many generations. He will abide before God forever. Appoint loving kindness and truth, that they may preserve him. So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may pay my vows day by day. Well, again, this is a psalm where we're told specifically that he is struggling, and you can see how he voices his complaint in verse 1. Hear my cry, O God, give heed to my prayers. As if he's saying, listen to me, God, pay attention to me, please. It is a cry of desperation, and the desperation is particularly seen in verse 2. From the end of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. And his description is kind of twofold. From the end of the earth, he feels completely alone. He feels isolated. Whether he actually is isolated or he just feels isolated by his problem, I'm calling to you from the end of the earth. And not only isolated, as if he has nowhere else to turn or no one else to turn to, but he says, my heart is faint. It is as if he feels overwhelmed and he's not sure what to do now. Perhaps he is tempted to be paralyzed by inactivity. Maybe he looks at his choices and there is no obvious choice. Or they all look like bad choices. And which one do you take? What do you do? And so from the end of the earth, my heart is faint. God, I'm calling to you. He finds himself there. And there is no one else to turn to, but there is one to turn to. There is a safe place to look. And the fact that there is nowhere else to look or nowhere else to run to doesn't cause him to kind of shrink inside himself and stick his head in the sand like an ostrich, but rather it emboldens him to run nearer to the one who is unchanging and who is a refuge to him. His call then comes from here in verse 2. First, in that place, from the end of the earth, I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. I do hope that is reminiscent to you of Psalm 46. And if you haven't been here past couple of weeks, that's what we've been looking at on Sunday mornings. But, verses 1 and 2, God is our refuge and help or strength, a very present help in trouble. And then you think of verse 7 where, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. That's who God is to us. And David is saying something very similar here. I crying out to you, God, lead me to this rock that is higher than I. Lead me to this place of safety. A place where I am protected from the storms and I am protected from whatever it is that he's facing right now. But it's also a place of perspective when you don't know what to do. God, lead me to the rock that's higher than I. Lead me to a higher place where I can see maybe more closely as you see. Help me to see and understand what you're doing. Lead me there. Well, he doesn't just cry out to God, but he also continues to think, and he remembers the past kindnesses of God in verse 3. You have been a refuge for me, a tower of strength against the enemies. And we don't have time to think about all the examples in David's life right now, but I mean, you can probably just replay very quickly in your mind a few of them. There have been so many times when God has proven to be that to him, and I would think, believer, that he has proven to be that for you. So verse 3 looks at past experience, and that leads him to verse 4, where he expresses his expectation for future help. Let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. You've been a refuge. Let me still take refuge. Let me run to you. The word tent is probably a reference to the tabernacle, where God's glory dwelt. Let me come there where you dwell, and let me dwell with you forever. I don't want to leave. A place where you can worship God, but also be near to God. It is a place of delight for him. I want to worship you there. But it's also a place of safety. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. You can think of Jesus to Jerusalem. I would take you like a hen, takes chicks under her wings. You would not. But here's David saying, I want to be the chick. I want to run under the shelter of your wings. In verses 5 through 7, he remembers both past and future kindnesses of God to him, promised kindnesses that have not yet been realized, but will. In verse 5, the first part of verse 5, he says, you have heard my vows, O God. These are vows that are attached or made in conjunction with prayer. And so when he says that you've heard my vows, it's akin to saying you've heard my prayers. It's not just that you heard me promise, but in hearing them and accepting them, he was also hearing and accepting the prayer. 1 John 5, 14 and 15 says, this is the confidence which we have before him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know that we have the request which we have asked from him. So this is kind of David's version, I think, of saying that. You've heard me. And knowing that you've heard me, I have every confidence that you're going to answer. Second half of verse 5 through verse 7, you have, he talks about life and years, but also eternity. Verse 5, you have given me the inheritance of those who fear your name. You will prolong the king's life. His years will be as many generations. He will abide before God forever. Appoint loving kindness and truth that they may preserve him. He has an expectation that he's not going to die now, whatever trouble this is. His life is going to be prolonged. He's going to be preserved. There's some promise here, he thinks, of years. Not a particular number, I don't think, but just that God is protecting him. And as long as he's alive, God's protecting him. And he will protect him until he brings him home. And of course, then he's still protecting him. And so God has preserved him. He's prolonged his life. He did see generations. And even better, through him comes the promised Messiah, the better David, whose reign is throughout all generations, whose reign will never end. And so there's also, I think, a whisper of that here. But even though the promises have come, and perhaps because these promises have come, and he remembers them, past mercies, future promises, he's emboldened again to pray, and so he prays at the end of verse 7, appoint loving kindness and truth that they may preserve him. Here's a prayer based on promise. God, you've said, and so God, appoint loving kindness and truth that they may preserve him. Let me always be under your protection. He remembers God's treatment of him in the past. He remembers promises made. He remembers answered prayer. His heart is made glad. And so we end in verse 8. I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may pay my vows day by day. And in that verse, again, we've moved from the complaint of verse 1 and 2. Here's my desperation to praise. But also, I think in verse 8, you see both delight and duty. I will sing praise to your name forever. This is delight. I want to do that. You've brought me to a place of delight. But also duty. It is my duty. I will pay my vows day by day. God, I'm commanded to come before you. I'm coming. But God, I want to come before you. You've made my heart glad. Well, I pray that God has made your heart glad this morning. And if not, think of what David has just done as he's reasoned with Scripture, as he's thought about how God has treated him, as he's preached to himself and stirred his heart to praise. And perhaps your heart will also be stirred to praise this morning. Let's look to him and call out to him now.